The courtroom went silent when the man in the navy dress uniform walked through the doors, not because he was tall, though he was 6'3" of rigid military posture, not because of the medals, though his chest carried enough ribbons to wallpaper a small room. It was his eyes. They swept the courtroom like a scope finding its target. Cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who had seen things that would break most people and had broken the things that tried to break him. Richard Hartwell III, Esquire, stopped mid-sentence. His confident smirk faltered. His attorney, Victoria Sloane, dropped her pen. And Sarah, sweet, broken, humiliated Sarah, looked up from the defendant's table where she had been crying for the past 45 minutes. Her eyes went wide. "Jake," she whispered. The man didn't smile. He didn't wave. He walked down the center aisle with the measured pace of a predator who knew exactly how much time he had before the kill. He stopped directly behind Sarah's chair. "Sorry I'm late, sis," he said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. Traffic out of Afghanistan was a nightmare. Richard Hartwell's face went pale. Because in 15 years of marriage, Sarah had never once mentioned she had a brother, and she certainly never mentioned he was a Navy SEAL. The Norfolk Circuit Court smelled like old paper, floor polish, and broken dreams. It was a Tuesday morning in November, the kind of grey Virginia day that made everything feel heavier than it should. Sarah Mitchell Hartwell sat alone at the defendant's table. She was 41 years old, though she looked 50. Her hair, once a vibrant auburn, had faded to a dull brown streaked with grey. Her eyes were rimmed with red. Her hands trembled as she clutched a folder of documents that her court-appointed attorney had told her wouldn't matter anyway. The court-appointed attorney wasn't there. He had called in sick that morning. "Flu," his secretary had said. "He'll file a continuance." But the continuance never came. And now Sarah was alone, facing her husband's legal team, Victoria Sloane, the most expensive divorce attorney in Virginia, and two paralegals who looked at Sarah like she was a stain on the mahogany table. "Your Honor," Victoria Sloane began, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "My client, Mr. Richard Hartwell III, has been more than generous in these proceedings. He has offered Mrs. Hartwell a settlement that far exceeds what she deserves, given the circumstances." Sarah wanted to speak. She wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. 15 years. 15 years of marriage to a man who had slowly, systematically dismantled her life. It started small. "You don't need to work, sweetheart. I make enough for both of us." So she quit her nursing job. Then, "Your friends don't understand our lifestyle, they're jealous." So she stopped seeing her friends. Then, "Your family is toxic. They never supported us." So she stopped calling her mother, her father, her brother, the brother she hadn't spoken to in 12 years because Rick said he was a bad influence. And finally, "You're nothing without me, Sarah. Nothing. Who would want you?" She had believed him. God help her, she had believed him. Judge Harold Patterson looked at Sarah over his reading glasses. He was an old man, stern but not unkind. "Mrs. Hartwell, I see that your attorney is not present. Do you wish to request a continuance?" Sarah opened her mouth to answer, but Victoria Sloane cut in. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell has already requested 3 continuances. My client is a busy man. He runs a $400 million real estate development firm. Every day this drags on costs him money. We request that the proceedings continue as scheduled." "Mrs. Hartwell?" the judge asked. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. I don't know what to do. My attorney—" "She doesn't have an attorney, Your Honor," Victoria interrupted smoothly. "Not a real one, anyway. She's been relying on court-appointed counsel because she has no resources of her own. No income, no assets, no family support." Victoria paused, letting that sink in. "She has no one." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Judge Patterson frowned. "Ms. Sloane, that's enough editorializing. Let's proceed with the matter at hand." "Of course, Your Honor." Victoria smiled, the smile of a shark that had just tasted blood. "We would like to call Mr. Richard Hartwell to testify regarding the division of assets." Rick Hartwell took the stand like he owned it. He was handsome in that polished, expensive way. $3,000 suit, $500 haircut, teeth so white they could blind a jury. He was 53 years old and looked 40, thanks to a personal trainer, a dermatologist, and the complete absence of guilt. "Mr. Hartwell," Victoria began, "can you describe your marriage to Sarah?" Rick sighed, a perfectly rehearsed sigh of disappointment. "I loved Sarah, I really did. I gave her everything. A beautiful home in Great Neck, cars, jewelry, vacations. I supported her completely after she decided to stop working." "Decided to stop working?" Victoria prompted. "Yes, Sarah didn't want to work. She preferred to stay home. I never complained. I was happy to provide for her." He shook his head sadly. "But over the years she became unstable." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "Unstable how?" "Paranoid, delusional. She accused me of having affairs, completely unfounded accusations. She isolated herself from friends and family. She became dependent on alcohol." Rick looked at Sarah with practiced pity. "I tried to help her. I paid for therapy, rehab programs, but she refused to get better." "That's not true," Sarah whispered. No one heard her. "And the finances?" Victoria continued. "I handled everything. Sarah had no interest in money. She didn't even know how to balance a checkbook. I set up accounts for her, gave her credit cards, but she was careless. She ran up debts. I paid them off again and again." Victoria nodded sympathetically. "So when Mrs. Hartwell filed for divorce and demanded half of your assets, I was shocked," Rick said, "and hurt. After everything I did for her, she wanted to take half of what I built, my company, my investments. It felt like betrayal." Victoria turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have documentation showing that Mrs. Hartwell contributed nothing to the marital assets. No income, no investments, no work of any kind. Meanwhile, my client built a $400 million empire. We ask that the court award Mr. Hartwell the majority of the assets, with a modest settlement for Mrs. Hartwell to help her." "Transition? How modest?" Judge Patterson asked. $50,000. Sarah gasped. 50,000. After 15 years, after giving up her career, her friends, her family, after being told she was worthless so many times that she believed it. $50,000 to rebuild a life that Rick had systematically destroyed. "Does Mrs. Hartwell wish to cross-examine?" Judge Patterson asked. Sarah stood up. Her legs were shaking. Her voice was barely audible. "Rick, that's not what happened. You told me to quit my job. You told me to stop seeing my friends. You controlled everything, the money, the decisions, who I could talk to. Your Honor," Victoria interrupted, "Mrs. Hartwell is making unsubstantiated accusations. She has no evidence of any controlling behavior. In fact," she held up a folder, "we have testimony from Mr. Hartwell's staff, his colleagues, and even Mrs. Hartwell's former therapist stating that she exhibited signs of paranoid delusion and self-destructive behavior." "My therapist?" Sarah's face went white. "You got my therapist to—" "Dr. Brennan provided a statement voluntarily," Victoria said smoothly. "He was concerned about your well-being." Sarah's world was collapsing. The therapist Rick had chosen for her. The therapist Rick had paid for. Of course he had turned on her, too. "This is a lie," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "All of it. Rick is lying. He hurt me. He controlled me. He made me believe I was crazy so I would never leave." Rick shook his head sadly, performing sympathy for the judge. "You see, Your Honor, this is what I dealt with for 15 years. The accusations, the paranoia. I loved Sarah, but I couldn't save her from herself." Victoria moved in for the kill. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell has no evidence, no witnesses, no attorney, and frankly, no credibility. She is a woman with a documented history of mental instability, making wild accusations against a respected businessman. We ask that you rule in my client's favor and end this proceeding." Judge Patterson looked at Sarah. His expression was not unkind, but it was resigned. "Mrs. Hartwell, do you have any evidence to support your claims? Any witnesses?" Sarah looked around the empty courtroom. Her attorney wasn't there. Her friends were gone, driven away years ago. Her family thought she had abandoned them. Her mother had died 2 years ago without knowing why Sarah stopped calling. Her father had dementia and didn't recognize her anymore. And Jake, her brother Jake. She hadn't spoken to him in 12 years. The last time they talked, she had screamed at him for not respecting her marriage. Rick's words, Rick's script. She had pushed away the only person who had ever truly protected her. "No, Your Honor," Sarah whispered. "I have no one." Victoria smiled. "No family," Victoria said, addressing the court. "No friends. No one to speak for her, no one to support her." She paused for effect. "No one is coming to save her." The courtroom doors slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot. Everyone turned. And there he was. Commander Jake Mitchell, United States Navy, walked down the center aisle like he was entering a combat zone. Because to him, that's exactly what this was. He was 45 years old, but he moved like a man half his age. His dress blue uniform was immaculate, gold buttons gleaming, ribbons aligned with mathematical precision. On his chest, bronze star, silver star, purple heart, Navy cross. On his shoulder, the trident of a Navy SEAL. His face was weathered, tanned from deserts and jungles, and places that didn't exist on any map. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from Fallujah that he never talked about. But it was his eyes that made people stop breathing. They were Sarah's eyes, the same green, the same shape. But where Sarah's eyes were broken and afraid, Jake's were forged steel. Cold. Steady. The eyes of a man who had stared down death so many times that death had started looking away first. He stopped behind Sarah's chair. "Sorry I'm late, sis." Sarah couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She just stared at the brother she hadn't seen in 12 years, the brother she had pushed away because her husband told her to. "Jake," she finally managed, "how did you—" "I didn't—" "Later." Jake's voice was soft when he spoke to her, gentle even, but when he turned to face the front of the courtroom, the softness vanished. "Your Honor," Jake said, "I apologize for the interruption. I've been deployed overseas for the past 11 months. I only learned about these proceedings 48 hours ago when I landed in Norfolk." Judge Patterson studied Jake with interest. "And you are?" "Commander Jake Mitchell, ma'am, United States Navy. I'm Sarah's brother." Victoria Sloan recovered quickly. She was too good to be rattled for long. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The witness list was closed weeks ago. Commander Mitchell has no standing in these proceedings. He can't simply walk in and—" "I'm not here as a witness," Jake interrupted. He reached into his uniform jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "I'm here to deliver evidence." He walked to the judge's bench and placed the envelope down. "What is this?" Judge Patterson asked. "Documentation that Mr. Hartwell has been lying to this court. Financial records he hid from the discovery process. Evidence of assets concealed in offshore accounts. And—" Jake's jaw tightened. "Hospital records that Mrs. Hartwell doesn't even know exist." The courtroom went silent. Rick Hartwell's confident smirk vanished. "Your Honor," Victoria said quickly, "this is an ambush. These documents haven't been authenticated. We need time to review." "You'll have time," Jake said. "But first I'd like to ask Mr. Hartwell a few questions." "Commander Mitchell," Judge Patterson said carefully, "you're not an attorney. You can't cross-examine—" "I'm not asking as an attorney, Your Honor." Jake turned to face Rick, and something in his expression made the room temperature drop 10 degrees. "I'm asking as a brother who wants to understand why his sister has 3 documented hospital visits for household accidents, all of which happened when her husband was home." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Rick Hartwell's face had gone from confident to pale to something approaching terror. "I don't know what you're talking about," Rick said, but his voice cracked. Jake walked slowly toward the witness stand. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He had spent 18 years hunting men far more dangerous than Richard Hartwell. This was just another mission. "Let me refresh your memory," Jake said. "March 14th, 2019. Sarah was admitted to Centara Norfolk General with a fractured wrist. The report says she fell down the stairs." He pulled a paper from the envelope. "June 2nd, 2020. She was admitted again, this time with bruised ribs and a black eye. The report says she walked into a door." Another paper. "December 18th, 2021. Third admission. Concussion and facial lacerations. The report says, "She was clumsy," Rick shouted. "She drank. She fell. This isn't evidence of anything." Jake stopped walking. He was 3 feet from Rick now. "Funny thing about hospital records, Rick. They include notes from the attending physician. Dr. Amelia Foster treated Sarah all 3 times. She noted that the injuries were inconsistent with the explanations given. She recommended a domestic violence screening." Jake leaned closer. "But someone made sure that screening never happened. Someone spoke to the hospital administrator, a man named Gerald Price, who just happens to be on the board of Hartwell Development Corp., and the recommendation disappeared from the file." Rick's attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, this is speculation. Commander Mitchell is making accusations without evidence." Jake reached into the envelope again. "I have Gerald Price's resignation letter. He submitted it 3 days ago after I paid him a visit. He was very cooperative once I explained that obstruction of justice carries a prison sentence." Jake tossed the letter onto the judge's bench. He provided a sworn statement that Richard Hartwell personally asked him to bury the domestic violence flags. He also provided records of payments, $50,000 over 3 years, disguised as consulting fees. Judge Patterson picked up the documents, her expression darkening. "Mr. Hartwell," the judge said slowly, "these are serious allegations." "They're lies." Rick stood up, his composure crumbling. "This man, I don't even know him. He shows up out of nowhere with fabricated documents." "You don't know me?" Jake's voice was quiet, but it cut through Rick's shouting like a blade. "That's interesting. Because I know you, Rick. I've known about you for 15 years. Jake turned to address the courtroom. "When Sarah married Richard Hartwell, I ran a background check. Standard procedure when your baby sister marries a stranger." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm a SEAL. We're thorough." He pulled another document from the envelope. "I found some interesting things. A sealed juvenile record from Connecticut. Assault charges that Daddy's lawyers made disappear. A restraining order from a college girlfriend that was quietly withdrawn after a financial settlement. A pattern, Rick. A pattern of hurting women and paying to make it go away." "This is insane," Rick sputtered. "Sarah, tell them I never—" "Don't talk to her." Jake's voice dropped to a whisper, but everyone heard it. "Don't look at her. Don't even say her name." The threat was clear. Rick shut his mouth. "Why didn't you say something?" Sarah's voice was small, broken. 15 years, Jake. If you knew, why didn't you stop me from marrying him?" Jake's expression softened, the first crack in his armor. "I tried, Sarah. I showed you the records before the wedding." "Do you remember?" Sarah's face went pale. She did remember. A week before her wedding, Jake had shown up at her apartment with a folder. He had begged her to look at it, to reconsider, and she had screamed at him, called him jealous, called him controlling, said he was trying to ruin her happiness, Rick's words. She had screamed Rick's words at her own brother. "You said you never wanted to see me again," Jake continued quietly. "So I respected your wishes. I stayed away, but I never stopped watching, Sarah. I never stopped keeping records. Every time you went to the hospital, I knew. Every time you tried to call Mom and hung up, I knew. I was waiting for the day you were ready to fight back." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Jake, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize to me." Jake walked over and knelt beside her chair. For a moment, the hardened SEAL commander was gone, replaced by an older brother who had never stopped loving his sister. "You survived. That's all that matters. Now let me finish this." He stood up and faced Rick Hartwell. "Now, let's talk about the money." Victoria Sloan was scrambling. "Your Honor, I request a recess. My client needs time to review these allegations and prepare a response." "Denied." Judge Patterson's voice was ice. "Mr. Hartwell testified under oath that he handled all finances and that Mrs. Hartwell contributed nothing. I want to see where this goes." Jake nodded and pulled out a thick folder. During discovery, Mr. Hartwell claimed his net worth was approximately $8 million. That's what he offered to divide in the settlement. He spread papers across the evidence table. The actual number is closer to $47 million. Victoria's face went white. He hid $39 million in offshore accounts across 3 countries, the Caymans, Switzerland, and Singapore. He used shell corporations to disguise the transfers. And here's the interesting part. Jake tapped one of the documents. The initial capital for those accounts came from the sale of a property in 2012. What property? Judge Patterson asked. A property that was jointly owned by Richard and Sarah Hartwell, Sarah's childhood home, the home her parents left her when they passed. Sarah's head snapped up. What? You didn't know? Jake looked at her gently. Rick had you sign papers in 2011. He told you it was a tax document. It was actually a transfer of deed. He sold your family home for $2.3 million and used it to seed his offshore accounts. That house was supposed to go to... Sarah couldn't finish. That house was supposed to go to Jake. Their parents had left it to both of them, but Sarah had been managing the estate. He forged your signature on the transfer to me, Jake said. Told me you wanted to sell. I didn't question it at the time. By the time I realized what happened, the money had disappeared overseas. Sarah looked at Rick. For the first time, her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were filled with rage. You stole my parents' house. Rick's mouth opened and closed. He had no answer. Your Honor, Jake continued, I'm not a lawyer. I can't tell you what laws were broken, but I can tell you that Richard Hartwell committed fraud, perjury, and theft. He abused my sister physically and financially for 15 years, and he walked into this courtroom expecting to walk out with everything because he thought she had no one. Jake placed both hands on the evidence table. He was wrong. Judge Patterson studied the documents for a long moment. When she looked up, her expression had transformed. Mr. Hartwell, based on the evidence presented today, I am ordering an immediate freeze on all your domestic and, once we can coordinate with federal authorities, international assets pending a full forensic audit. You can't do this, Rick shouted. This is my money. I earned it. You stole it, the judge corrected, and you lied under oath about it. That's perjury, Mr. Hartwell, in my courtroom. She turned to Victoria Sloan. Counselor, I suggest you advise your client to retain criminal defense representation. I'll be referring this case to the district attorney's office. Victoria looked like she wanted to disappear. Her reputation was built on winning ugly divorces for wealthy clients. This was a career-ending disaster. Furthermore, Judge Patterson continued, I'm striking Mr. Hartwell's testimony from the record. Mrs. Hartwell's claims of financial abuse and controlling behavior are now credible in light of this evidence. I'm reversing my preliminary asset ruling. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. The offshore accounts, once recovered, will be divided according to equitable distribution, which, given Mr. Hartwell's fraud, I am inclined to weight heavily in Mrs. Hartwell's favor. Rick was on his feet. This is a setup. This man... He pointed at Jake. He fabricated all of this. He's military. He has access to... Mr. Hartwell, Judge Patterson interrupted coldly. Commander Mitchell is a decorated Navy SEAL who has served this country for 18 years. He has no criminal record, no history of fraud, and no financial interest in this case other than protecting his sister. You, on the other hand, have just been caught committing multiple felonies in my courtroom. She banged her gavel. We're in recess. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Hartwell does not leave this building. I believe the police will want to speak with him. The courtroom emptied slowly. Lawyers gathered their papers. The bailiff escorted a shell-shocked Rick Hartwell to a holding area. Victoria Sloan fled without looking back. Sarah sat frozen at the defendant's table, staring at the wall. Jake sat down beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. How did you know? Sarah finally asked. How did you know to come today? I have friends in the system. One of them flagged your case when your attorney dropped out. I was on a transport back from Kandahar when I got the message. Caught a military flight to Norfolk and drove straight here. Sarah laughed, a broken, disbelieving sound. You flew across the world to walk into a courtroom? I've done longer trips for less important reasons. Sarah's laughter turned to tears. Jake, I pushed you away. I said terrible things. I believed him over you. I know. How can you even look at me? Jake reached over and took her hand. His grip was rough, calloused from years of holding weapons and climbing ropes and dragging wounded brothers out of firefights. But it was gentle. Sarah, when we were kids, you used to make me lunch every day because Mom was working double shifts. You helped me with my homework even though you were terrible at math. You cried for a week when I enlisted because you were scared I'd get killed. He squeezed her hand. You're my sister. You don't stop being family because someone convinces you to push me away. That's not how it works. That's not how I work. Sarah broke down completely. She sobbed into her brother's shoulder, years of pain